Obamacare before the Supreme Court this past week, which was exciting to watch. Judge Scalia actually pulled the Eighth Amendment out in regards to reading the bill, 2,700 pages, as being cruel and unusual, and he might be right about that. But you're going to be going to Congress, one of you gentlemen will be there. Will you read the bills? And that would be you, Paul. You'll be starting first here.
I was hoping you were going to ask me about Obamacare. Well, I read
that too.
Well, read the bills, yes. One of the things I have found in serving in office is too many times I go to the table and find out that my fellow city council members or commissioners haven't read the material when they get there, and they don't know what we're talking about. And that's a travesty. If you get elected, you take on a certain responsibility and an obligation to the people that you're serving to know what you're dealing with. And by the way, the Supreme Court, I hope, will end Obamacare because the mandate of the Constitution. If they do not, then the next Congress needs to end Obamacare.
Will I read the bill? Yes. Kane principle, baby. Constitutional, affordable, necessary, and ethical.
Mr. Holt.
Well, you know, if you actually read the Constitution and follow that, the bills that come before you ought to be pretty simple. Because the federal government really doesn't need to be doing all that much under the Constitution. So, if the bill is trying to do something that's obviously not comporting with the Constitution, I ain't going to read it. It's a waste of time. I'm going to vote against it and get under the next one. So.
We have some audience questions, and one of my favorites from Christopher Vincent, who is 9 years old, says, if you are elected, what would be your first law you would support? Mr. Rick.
The first law I would support. Can it be something repealed?
That's way too easy. Even I can come up with a couple of those.
The first law I would support would be a law that removes the 16th Amendment and brings in a new tax code.
Most folks go to Washington, and the first thing they want to do is get their name on a bill. You know, have the John Smith something 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 really good idea bill. Well, I think that the best thing to do is repeal 5 for every one that you pass. So we're going to have to repeal at least 5.
The Paul Coble something 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 bill would be to have a balanced budget amendment for us.
From Joanne and Mr. Holding, we'll start this off from Lizard Lake, North Carolina. Do you support voter ID? If not, why?
I absolutely support voter ID. I mean, you got to produce an ID to do anything. And the notion that you don't need to have an ID to go vote is ridiculous on its face. And we all know the real reason why the Democrats don't want to have voter ID.
Mr. Cole.
Well, I think I've pretty much staked myself out on this issue. We passed a resolution at the County Commission just recently asking the legislature to pass voter ID.
Since that is an issue at the states with voter ID, I think I want to give you an answer relative to being in the federal government in Congress. And that is to attack the belly of the beast and attack the notion that you're disenfranchising poor and blacks by by having them, get an ID card. You need to attack that notion and remove the argument that people try to make and saying that it is something that is prejudicial to their, being good citizens or what have you. And until we actually challenge the notion and bring it, have a spirited debate on that, we're going to allow this argument to continue to be perpetuated.
Doug from Rollsville and I kind of have the same question. Thank you, Doug. What can you do to bring jobs back to America? How can you go about getting support from members of Congress to do this?
Well, government doesn't create jobs. Private businesses, especially small business, creates jobs. And what you have to do with government is you have to get rid of regulations, you have to get rid of the rules to free up government and to allow them to put investment back into the marketplace. President Obama has passed $48 billion worth of new regulations that are going to cost another $11 billion to put into place. That takes money out of the economy, and that's absolutely kills jobs. We've got to get government out of the way and get people back to work.
In case someone didn't hear it, tomorrow the United States has the unfortunate distinction of being the most heavily taxed country in the free world. And that's sad. We need to reduce the tremendous burden of taxation. And I spoke earlier about reforming and repeal of the 16th Amendment and bringing in the fair tax and incorporating things like Herman Cain's 999 plan, but we definitely need to get away from the system that we have, and also reducing, not eliminating regulations, but reducing unnecessary regulations to free up the businesses, because some regulation is necessary, but the burdensome regulation in all those volumes is not the way to go.
Ronald Reagan said it best, government is not the solution, government is the problem. The regulations cost Americans $1.75 trillion a year. For every employee in a small business, it costs $10,000 to comply with government regulations. This is what we're doing to ourselves. We can eliminate a lot of that regulation and get government out of the way, a free enterprise, entrepreneurship, and let that create jobs and get our economy up back on track.
Mr. Randall, D. Sands of Franklinton wants to know what your opinion is, all of the candidates' opinion might be on the fair tax.
I am a staunch supporter of the fair tax because it's an end-user tax. If you buy a lot of goods, you're going to pay a lot of fair tax. If you buy a little bit of goods, you're going to pay a little bit of tax. If you are a job creator and a manufacturer and someone who's a risk taker and an entrepreneur, you're going to pay no tax. It places the tax at the end user, and it does not tax used goods. Now, some say, and I had Brad Miller challenge me on this during the primary, saying that Bill Randall is in favor of increasing tax, personal income tax, 23 to 27%. Well, given that we're already over 50%, 23 to 27 sounds pretty good. And so we need to look exactly at what is happening with the tax code. The fair tax is something that I can get behind and support because it incorporates phasing out the 16th Amendment and phasing in a system that will be more fair and equitable.
I prefer what Paul Ryan has proposed here in recent weeks, lowering the tax brackets and broadening out the base and having more people paying tax but less tax. The key to that is closing all the loopholes. And I think it is easier to close all the loopholes in income tax and make it a much simpler tax than on a consumption tax, because you know that politicians say, all right, we can't charge sales tax on diapers, we can't charge sales tax on this, we can't charge sales tax for poor people, we can't charge sales tax for this. I think it's easier to take our income tax, lower the rates, broaden the base, and close all the loopholes.
As you've already heard, we have the highest tax rate in the world. What we need is a tax rate that will encourage economic growth. It needs to be simple, it needs to be flat, and it needs to be fair.
As the world gets ready to burn in Florida, I read about 2 more bodies of heroes coming back to Fort Bragg in flag-draped coffins. When you get to Washington, what is your timetable, or what timetable would you support bringing our troops home? And once they are, if any of us ever live to see this godforsaken war, what is your idea or plan for the military?
Whose turn is this?
I have no idea, Mr. Holding.
Well, first off, the world is a dangerous place, and we always have to have the strongest military in the world. Second, we need to follow the Constitution. If we go to war, we need to have a declaration of war, because generals win wars and politicians lose wars, and our founders knew that, and that's why we have an article in the Constitution that requires a declaration of war, so the politicians can have their great debate about whether we should go to war, and if the decision is we're going to war, you give it to the generals and say, win that war. And I would demand, if I were in Congress, that the President come before Congress and make a case for a declaration of war. And if we're going to go to war, we're going to win that war. But you have to have a declaration of war, because that's what the Constitution requires.
With the military, we have to define the mission, and then we have to fund it. The Republican Review Study Committee just recently said, instead of cutting everything in the federal budget, the one area that we needed to deal with in increased funding was over the next 10 years, we needed to increase military funding to make sure that we're safe. Because let's face it, if we're not safe, nothing else really matters.
I am the only candidate in the race that will not have to rely upon Google and the advice of others on the stand we need to take with our military. And I think that's very important. I've been at the tip of the sword during time of war, during Desert Storm, and actually being in the room making decisions with the decision makers. When we're talking about our military, you have to take an approach that, yes, defines the mission, enables the units to do their job, but I am against timetables, and I am for letting them do their job and giving them the rules of engagement to win.
And I would like to ask, would you support abolishing pensions for congressmen? Maybe including the Senate and the House and Obamacare and some of these other plans they are bestowing upon the public but seem to exempt themselves. Mr. Coble, how do you feel about that?
Let me lead by example. When I was first elected to the county commission, they actually provided benefits, retirement benefits to county commissioners. We're part-time employees. I looked at those who had been elected. I was the only one that was coming in the office that would be affected, and so I went ahead and said, let's cut it out. We don't need to be doing that anymore. We don't need to be giving benefits to part-time employees. When you go to Congress, you're an employee of the people of this country. Your compensation needs to be fair, direct, and it ought to be equal with the people of the country, not a separate program that is set up and special just for those people.
I would say on the surface, I am against carte blanche, let's get rid of all the pensions to sound good for a soundbite. You do have congressional members that have longevity, that have been there for a long period of time. And I think to just wipe the slate clean indiscriminately without looking into impact and what have you, I think is wrong. However, having said that, I do not believe that a new congressman has earned any kind of tenure or retirement, and I am 100% for abolishing pensions in those cases.
Term limits would solve it all. Senator Dement has a great bill that will limit House members to 3 terms, senators to 2 terms. I think that's a great bill. We ought to amend the Constitution to have term limits. I further don't think that if you go to Washington and don't do your job, you shouldn't get paid. You know, we haven't had a budget passed by Congress and signed by Obama in over 3 years. I mean, what is more fundamental than passing a budget? If that's not evidence that things are broken, I don't know what more evidence that we can give.